In this video, I want to walk through my color grading workflow and what personally works for me. I want to start off by saying I'm not a professional colorist by any means. This is just what works for me personally when I have to color grade my own projects and there's no budget for a professional colorist. Also, I'm doing this like dramatic close-up right now because I'm moving and every single room in my house looks like shit. So in the past, I've always really struggled trying to get the look I want when color grading my own projects. And color grading can get pretty technical and complicated very quickly. And there's so many tutorials and information out there, and it can be pretty overwhelming at times. So I'm gonna try and break down my own process with all the information that I've obtained over the years that has made it easier for me to consistently get the look I want. So the first thing I wanna talk about is color management. I'm not gonna get too technical about this, but here's what I do that works for me. So choosing your color space and why. So Gamma 2.4 is probably the most popular color space because it's what's used for broadcast. But whenever I would export a video in Gamma 2.4, I would often get these gamma shifts. So my video would look different on my phone than it did on my laptop or my desktop computer. And I'm sure if you've exported in Gamma 2.4, you've had this problem as well. So what I've learned is to choose the color space based on where your video will play. So they'll most likely be seen on a phone, laptop, or tablet, and will probably not be seen on a TV. Therefore, I export in a Rec. 709A color space. So the reason I use this color space and not a Gamma 2.4 is because it's giving me way more consistent results across phone screens, laptop screens, and like tablet screens. And it's not perfect. I'm sure there's a better and probably a more correct option out there, but for me, it's what's worked the most consistently. So the next thing you should be doing in terms of color management is using CSTs or color space transforms. Again, I'm not gonna get too technical, but it's basically mapping footage from one color gamut to another. So for example, converting log to Rec. 709. And later on in the video, when I actually grade something, I'll talk a little bit more about this. So in terms of my setup, I don't have a calibrated monitor that I use for color grading. And I don't think it's realistic for smaller filmmakers to have a properly calibrated monitor like a Flanders or something. They're really expensive and it's just out of reach for most people. So in terms of my own setup, I use a Mac Studio to edit, and I have a larger external monitor just to see more of my timeline. But I actually use my iPad as a second monitor and a clean video feed when I'm color grading. The newer iPads are pretty color accurate, and like I said earlier, most of my projects are going to be viewed on smaller devices like iPhones, laptops, and iPads, so it kind of just makes sense to color grade on one of those devices. And since I started doing this, all the videos that I export from Resolve look consistently the same on all my devices, my iPhone, my iPad, my laptop. And again, this is where most people are viewing my projects, so I want to make sure they look good on those devices specifically. The last thing I want to talk about before we jump into DaVinci is trying to create a look. So I've tried tons of different LUTs, plugins, power grades over the years, trying to get certain looks. However, recently Dehancer sent me a 1-month trial for their plugin for DaVinci. And they asked me if I liked it to make a review about it, and I honestly thought I never was gonna do that, but I can honestly say that this is the best plugin I've ever used. It's easy to use, and most importantly, it's very customizable with tons of different film looks and film scans, which I feel like a lot of different plugins and power grades are lacking. I feel like from the other like power grades I've used or plugins, you're kind of like dialed into one look, and with like Dehancer, it's really customizable. So let's hop into DaVinci and go through my color grading workflow. So as you can see here, I have like a node structure that I've saved and that I use frequently. And I got this node structure from Darren Mostyn. I hope I'm saying that right. He's a professional colorist and he makes videos on YouTube. Definitely check out his stuff if you want to get more in-depth reviews of color grading. He has a lot of really great stuff on his channel. So I'll just drag this here, and then you can see it brings my little node tree. And let me drag this out a little bit, make it bigger. And as you can see, like it looks a little complicated, but I promise you it's really simple to use once you start using it. So the first thing I want to talk about is CSTs. And my first CST here, it brings me input, it brings me from Panasonic, which is what I shot this project on, my Lumix S5 2X. It brings me from Panasonic Vlog into DaVinci wide gamut color space. Okay, so you're gonna need that first CST in order to bring your log over to Rec 709 and make sure you're viewing it correctly. And this CST here, it brings me from DaVinci wide gamut into a Rec 709A color space, which is the color space I'm going to be exporting out to because this project is going to be shown primarily on the web. And actually, before you start anything, go to your color management tab and make sure that your output color space is matching the color space that you're going to output to, and that should be on your second CST here. So mine is set to Rec 709 Alpha because that's what I'm going to be exporting to. As you can see here, there's a bunch. If you're using Gamma 2.4, make sure it's set to Gamma 2.4. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much more technical depth about CSTs. There's tons of videos out there that you can watch from people that know a lot more than I do about that stuff. But this is how my node structure is, and this is how it works for me. So with our CSTs on, you can see it's bringing us from a log to a much more viewable look, which is like a Rec 709. And that's our starting point. Now, I'm gonna turn on Dehancer, this is kind of where all the ones with the red text here, this is where I'm building my look. So I'm building my look with Dehancer, and this is after I've done all my primary grading, but you wanna dial this in before you start doing your initial exposure and whatnot, because this is really gonna dictate like the contrast and the look of your final project. So, and this is the Dehancer tab here, and as you can see, it's giving you a ton of different options. So for this tutorial, I'm gonna show you what I did for this actual project. So what I decided to do was use one of the film prints here, and there's a ton. You can see there's Cineon film log. Oh, you gotta enable it. So there's Cineon film log, Fujifilm, Kodak 23A3 print, Kodak glossy paper. I went with Kodak 23A3 print film from this. You can also use an actual film profile, like if you shot it on like Canon 250D or like 500T, as you can see here. I'll disable this one. And this gives you some pretty cool looks as well. You can probably use both. I've seen people stack both and get some pretty cool looks, but anyways, for this, I'm not gonna use a film profile, I'm just gonna use the print. So I use the Kodak 2383 print film for this project. I like the look it's giving me, so I'm gonna go with that. And on the bottom here, you can see output, and this is the strength that the look is giving you. So right now it's 100%. It's a little too much for my liking, so I'm gonna dial it down to about 60. Yeah, I guess you could just type that in. But I'm gonna dial that down to about 60, and then, yeah, so let me click enable. Yeah, so I like what that's doing, and I'm gonna leave that at 60, okay. So we've set our look to where we like, so now we're just gonna go ahead and do our primary grade. All right, so, sorry, I'm gonna make this a little bigger just so you guys can see it. I actually don't look at the image on this tab at all. I have my iPad here as a video clean feed, and I can see the entire image on it. I'm just making this a little bigger so you guys can see it on the screen recording. All right, so now I'm gonna adjust my exposure. And for this, I typically just use the Parade. You could use waveform. I don't think there's really a wrong. I think either of those will tell you where exposure is. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just what I'm doing. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to my HDR tab, because from my experience, the HDR tab just kind of lets you fine tune it a little bit more when it comes to exposure and some certain other elements as well. So as we can see here, maybe it's a little too dark actually. Let's see. Let's see where I want to put it. Yeah, I want the leaves and the trail and the people, which is me and my girlfriend, to be a little more exposed, even though I'm kind of blowing out the sky a little bit, but we'll fix that later on. So I'm gonna put it to about here. And you see what I did there? It's pretty subtle. So I like my exposure right there. And now I'm gonna go to my balance node, and to do that, I'm gonna go to my vector scope. Basically what the balance does is it kind of just shifts the color into like, what you wanna do with the balance tab is you wanna shift the color into like a neutral position. So vector scope here, you kind of want to just get it closer to the middle here. So right now, let's see. That's too red. Yeah, so it's looking pretty bluey green, and I like dialing it back here, bringing some red and some yellows in. Let's see. Take some blue out. I don't like that. Yeah, so as you can see here, it looks kind of blue. There's a lot of blue in the shadows. That's probably from the 23A3 print film look that we're going for, but I'm kind of just making it a little warmer with my balance here. Something a little more neutral. It's not making too much of a difference here in the vector scope, but just ever so slightly. I think that looks okay for this tutorial. Okay, so the next thing I do is I'm gonna go to my contrast node. And you can do contrast in a bunch of different ways. You can use the primary color wheels here. You know, that can give you some contrast. You can also do it in your HDR. However, I just like to use the curves for contrast. So the first thing I do is turn on editable splines, and I'll show you why. And I like to just bring the highlights down a little and my blacks up a little, just so I don't clip them when I'm messing with my contrast. I'm just gonna create a little bit more contrast here. And this is what the editable splines does. It's allow you to like make sort of like an S curve here. So I like it a little darker there. That's nice. And then let's see. Maybe just bring in a little more brightness. Yeah, so I like that. It's subtle. I mean, it's a pretty contrasty shot on its own, so I don't have to do too much here. I think when you're starting out, like at least I did, I'd always have a tendency to overdo it sometimes, and I just think a little goes a long way. So my next node is my saturation node. And for this, I'm gonna use the HDR tool because like I said earlier with the exposure tool on the HDR, it just lets you kind of like bring in saturation more finely than the primary color tab. So if you can see here, it's pretty saturated already, which you can see here from the vector scope. Like see, if I take it away, the vector scope gets thinner, but if I put more in, it gets larger. So that's how you can tell saturation. But for this piece, I want it to be like I want it to be more saturated. You know, there's a lot of nature shots, so I really just want to like the greens to like pop out a little bit. So I'm gonna bring in some, I think around there is okay. Yeah. And again, this is all preference. I'm just kind of banging through this one pretty quickly, but I like that where that is now. And I feel like with saturation, especially since the two characters here are in the distance, and I can kind of get away with making the overall image a little more saturated because I don't have to worry about their skin tones as much as if it was a close-up. I would have to do a little more fine-tuning with like different colors and stuff like that. So next I'm gonna go to my parallels and I'm gonna adjust my temperature. Yeah, and again, I'm using the HDR to adjust my temperature. So let's see.
I think I definitely want like a warmer feel to this. I went a little overboard. I want a little bit of a warmer feel, so I'm gonna push that into the oranges. Yeah, that looks nice. And now I'm gonna go to this node and I'm gonna pull my highlights down a bit because just the sky's a little bit blown out for my liking. So I'm just gonna bring some more information back into that, as you can see here. But then again, I'm gonna go back to my exposure and just kind of bring in a little more brightness overall. Yeah, that's good. And then you'll see what I did there. Just brings a little more information back into the highlights. And now I'm on my tint node and I'm just gonna add a little bit of green. Yeah, see, just really subtle. Okay. See, and typically, like, I'll go back and forth, like, I'll adjust the temperature again. You know, since I brought some of the highlights down, maybe I'll go back to the exposure and just add a little bit more exposure. See if my contrast is still in a good place. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so these next set of nodes are my power windows. And what I'm gonna use the power windows for this shot is I just want our two characters here to pop out a little bit from the background. I think they're kind of falling in the darkness a little bit, but I don't wanna mess with the overall contrast and exposure of the entire shot. So in order to make them pop out a little bit, I'm going to use power windows. So you click this little circle here, you bring it over them, and I'm gonna increase the softness just so it's not as like drastic. When I like make them a bit brighter, it kind of just blends into the entire picture. And I'm gonna go to the gain tab and I'm just gonna make them a little bit brighter. I think like that. Yeah, even that might be a little too much. Maybe I'll bring it down a little bit. I think like there is okay. Okay, and so the next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna use another power window, but I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna make the entire background darker. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna Control C or Command C if you're on a Mac, which I'm on a Mac. And then I'm gonna copy it over to the next power window. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna invert it by clicking this little circle here. And I'm gonna bring down the gain just to make the background a little bit darker, so that our two characters pop out a little bit more. Maybe like there is okay. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm bringing down the overall exposure of the background, and then I brought up the exposure on our two characters just so they pop out a bit more. And this looks pretty good. I think we're in a pretty good spot. So now I'm gonna go over to my grain tab, and as you can see, in the Dehancer tab, you can enable grain. You can have everything under one node, but I like to separate them just so I can like turn it on and off and see if I actually like it or not. So I'm gonna go to grain. Oh, it's actually enabled already. Yeah, there's tons of different grain options here for different sizes of film, but I'm just gonna use the one that it kind of sets you up with, which is 35mm at a ASA of 250. So I'll enable it and I'll just put it to 100 so you see how drastic it can be. And you know, this is definitely a look, but not the look that I'm going for this. So I'm gonna dial that down. I just want it pretty subtle. Yeah, maybe about here. You know what, originally I put about 15 for this, but maybe I'll put a little bit more just for this tutorial. Yeah, I like that. I like where that's at right now. And so next I'm gonna go to my halation node. And I'll just use bloom and halation under the same tab. So if you don't know what bloom is, it's just kind of, you can see here it's creating just like, it's hard to explain, but it's creating just like a softness, I guess, like in the highlights. And if I bring that to 100, you can see. It's like if you ever use like a Black Pro Mist or like Glimmer Glass, it like just creates a lot of halation in the highlights, and this allows you to do it digitally if you didn't do it in camera. Let's see. I'm gonna do just a little bit, even that's too much. I think that's okay for this. Yeah. I like that, so we'll leave that. And then halation. Yeah, so that's pretty drastic. Let's see. Maybe just a little bit. Yeah, a little goes a long way for this. I like that. Yeah, so that's basically it. That's our grade using Dehancer. So yeah, that's pretty much my color grading process. I'm definitely not saying this is the right way to do it, but this is just what works for me after a lot of years of trial and error. So I hope you got something from this, and if you like this kind of stuff, please like and subscribe. It keeps me motivated to keep making videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.